We're taking on one of those directives that seems, incredibly simple on the surface. Thou shalt not bear false witness.
Right.
But what sounds like just a straightforward command about telling the truth. It turns out to be this foundational piece for ancient legal systems, a huge point of conflict in theology, and, well, kind of chillingly, a framework for some really controlling social doctrines today.
It's an incredible journey for a single command, really. And our sources today take us right back to the beginning. We're in Deuteronomy 19.
And not just one version of it.
No, we're not just looking at a modern translation. We are comparing the primary Hebrew source, the Masoretic text, with really early translations. We've got the Septuagint,
which is the Greek version the early church used.
Exactly, and the Targum Onkelos, which is an ancient Aramaic translation. And looking at those linguistic details it's essential. It shows you how fast the law went from being a specific judicial rule to a much broader moral command.
And then we trace that DNA forward. We've got material looking at how this ancient idea informed Enlightenment thinkers like William Blackstone, who, basically wrote the book on common law.
And we'll get into that fierce theological fight over whether a white lie can ever be a good thing.
Right. And then to bring it all into the present, we're going to analyze how these ideas of truth and authority play out in a very extreme modern context, specifically within the Institute in Basic Life Principles, or IBLP.
Yes.
So our mission today is pretty simple. We want you to see how this one law was first designed as this profound safeguard for the innocent, and then how all these different interpretations continue to shape our ideas of justice and morality, sometimes in pretty destructive ways.
And to get that, you have to start with just how severe the original law was.
You really do.
I mean, if you read Deuteronomy 19, the scenario is, it's serious. It talks about an unrighteous witness who rises up to bear perverted witness against someone.
This isn't a small disagreement. We're talking about something that could lead to prison, financial ruin.
Or even the death penalty.
And the punishment for that false witness is immediate and it's proportional.
Absolutely. This is a direct application of the lex talionis, the law of retaliation, but it's aimed right at the person who lied. If your false testimony is proven, you receive the exact punishment you were trying to bring on the other person.
The whole eye for eye, tooth for tooth thing.
But applied to the integrity of the witness stand, it's incredibly direct.
That level of justice is, well, it's terrifyingly efficient. I mean, if I accuse my neighbor of a capital crime, knowing I'm lying, and the court finds me out, I'm the one facing the death penalty. Didn't that high cost kind of paralyze the system? Were people afraid to testify because the personal risk was just too great?
The sources suggest that was the whole point. The high cost was intentional. It wasn't about encouraging everyone to talk. It was about ensuring the complete reliability of every single word spoken in court.
And this wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Not at all. We see a really powerful parallel in the Code of Hammurabi from centuries earlier in 18th century BCE Babylonia.
What did Hammurabi's code say about it?
It was just as severe. It shows that across the whole ancient Near East, the witness's integrity was everything to the justice system. If you lied in a case involving a life, you were put to death. If you lied about money, you had to pay the financial penalty that would have been imposed.
So the system was built to make the cost of lying just astronomically high.
Exactly.
But why? Why make the courtroom so severe? It feels like the goal was bigger than just punishing the one person who lied.
It was. It was absolutely bigger. The text is very clear about the communal purpose here. Deuteronomy 19.20 says the goal is so that the rest will hear and be afraid, and will never again do anything so evil among you.
Ah, so the punishment is a public spectacle.
It's for purification. Justice becomes a tool for, corporate holiness. It's designed to root out evil and restrain sin for the good of the whole community. The fear it talks about isn't just terror. It's a kind of reverent respect for the law.
That makes a lot of sense. You protect the community by eliminating the threat and deterring others. But if the punishment for getting it wrong is death, the system has to be perfect at figuring out who's lying. You cannot afford a mistake.
And that brings us to the most crucial and honestly the most overlooked part of this law, the procedural safeguard. The text doesn't just say, trust the oaths.
Right.
It mandates a critical rule for the judiciary. It says, the judges shall inquire diligently.
V'derishu hashafetim hokev. Inquire diligently. That changes everything, doesn't it? It shifts the entire burden of proof.
It puts all the responsibility right on the judge. The judge has to actively go out and find the truth. They are obligated to prevent an unjust verdict, A judge can't just, wash their hands of it because they followed the right procedures for oaths.
So if they convict someone based on testimony they didn't properly investigate, they're on the hook.
They're culpable, yes. It forces the court to be an active investigator, not just a passive listener.
And it's that rigor that stops the system from just becoming a kangaroo court based on popular opinion. This is what separates a legal system from mob justice.
And you see the power of that diligent inquiry in the story of Susanna from the Second Temple period.
Right. She was falsely accused by two elders, very credible men, and she was facing execution.
Exactly. And young Daniel comes in, and he doesn't challenge the law itself. He just demands that the procedure, the diligent inquiry, actually be followed.
He separates the witnesses, right,
Yeah.
and that's how he exposes the lie.
That's it. By questioning them separately, he gets different details about where the supposed act happened. One says under a mastic tree, the other says under an oak.
The story falls apart.
Instantly, their details contradict, proving it was all fabricated.
Yeah.
So Daniel applies the law of retaliation against them. It's a perfect demonstration that the procedure inquired diligently is the ultimate defense for the innocent.
The diligent inquiry worked, but there's another key safeguard in the text, and this is maybe the one that had the biggest impact on modern law. The two-witness rule.
Yes. Deuteronomy 19.15. It demands that any conviction has to be based on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses.
Which is fundamental.
The legal thinking behind it is just beautifully simple. It's about ensuring a significant degree of certainty. It's the state basically saying, we would rather let a guilty person go free than overstep our authority and punish an innocent person. The goal is restraint.
And this ancient idea echoes directly into Western law. This is where, ancient Jerusalem connects to Enlightenment London.
It really does. It comes back to that moral calculation. William Blackstone, the giant of English common law, writing in 1769, he famously put this idea into the legal imagination when he wrote, "It is better that 10 guilty persons escape than that one innocent suffer."
So all the procedural technicalities we complain about today, rules about hearsay, chain of custody, separating witnesses, they're not just random complexities.
No, they are fundamentally moral protections. They trace right back to this ancient procedural command.
That completely flips the script on how we should think about legal systems.
It does. They're the scaffolding that ensures the system sticks to its main moral job, protecting the individual from the power of the state or the crowd.
Okay, so this law was clearly a rigid, powerful legal tool, but at some point the conversation shifted from courtroom procedure to personal morality.
You can actually see that shift happening in the translation process itself. If you compare the Hebrew Masoretic text, which has these very specific legal terms, with the Septuagint.
The Greek translation.
Right. You see this conscious effort to generalize the legal ideas into broader moral principles.
How does that actually look in the language?
Well, for example, the Hebrew word avon, which often means iniquity or guilt, a specific legal state, gets translated in the Greek as adikos, which just means unjust.
So more general.
Much more. And even more telling, the Hebrew Sarah, meaning deviation or falsehood, is translated as sabia, which means impiety or godlessness.
So the specific crime of lying in court becomes the general moral state of being unjust or impious. It widens the scope from a crime against your neighbor to a sin against God.
Precisely. And that historical move paved the way for a huge debate. Because once the rule against false witness is one of the 10 Commandments, a categorical moral law, the question has to be asked, is lying ever okay?
And that is one of history's great philosophical puzzles. Where did the major thinkers land?
Christian thought pretty much split in two. On one side, you have the absolutists, thinkers like Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, John Calvin. They argued that lying is always wrong, always a sin no matter what. Augustine was famously strict about this, saying that even lying to save someone's life was a sin because it corrupts your soul.
Wow. No exceptions. Even in a life or death situation, that must have been hard for people to swallow.
It was, and it led to the non-absolutist counter-tradition. People like Clement of Alexandria and, much later, the 20th century theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. They defended deception for a good cause. Bonhoeffer, writing while resisting the Nazis, took on the philosopher Immanuel Kant directly.
And what was Bonhoeffer's argument against that total ban on lying?
He argued you should absolutely lie to a murderer to save a friend who's hiding in your house. He understood that lying might incur guilt, but he said that protecting your neighbor was the more moral action in that hierarchy of evils.
So for him, morality couldn't just be an abstract rule.
It had to be relational, rooted in your responsibility to other people.
He was basically saying the simple command to tell the truth is less important than the greater command to protect life.
That is the heart of the non-absolutist view. And what makes it all so complicated is that the biblical stories themselves sometimes seem to reward people who lie.
You're thinking of the Hebrew midwives who lied to Pharaoh to save the newborn boys.
Exactly. The text says God dealt well with the midwives. There's no condemnation, there's blessing. And then you have Rahab, who hid the spies and lied to soldiers. She's later praised in the New Testament for her good works.
So these stories make it really hard to treat the prohibition as a simple black and white rule.
They do. It's
Wow.
clearly not meant to be separated from the context and the consequences.
Okay, so we've gone from a legal safeguard to a huge theological debate. Now let's bring this into a contemporary social structure. The Institute in Basic Life Principles, or IBLP. This is where we see what happens when you take these ideas of truth and submission and strip away all those ancient procedural safeguards.
Well, when you get rid of the demand for diligent inquiry and you replace it with a system of total, unquestioning submission,
Yeah.
the results are catastrophic. IBLP, founded by Bill Gothard, built an entire system of life on these very specific prescriptive rules that they call biblical principles.
And what do those principles look like, especially when it comes to authority?
They enforce a very strict principle of authority. Wives must be totally subservient to their husbands. Children must obey their parents unquestioningly. The whole system demands conformity to these restrictive rules, including, extremely specific modesty guidelines for women,
Like what?
covering legs to the knee, arms to the elbow, avoiding clingy fabrics, or anything that might draw attention to so-called risque areas.
So in that system, truth and righteousness aren't measured by some objective legal standard. It's about your personal adherence to a man-made set of rules.
Precisely. And this is where the system completely inverts that ancient goal of protecting the innocent. When this moral system runs into situations of actual harm, like sexual assault, the lack of a diligent inquiry is devastating.
How does the organization deal with accusations of abuse within that framework?
It introduces doctrines that, well, they essentially blame the victim. The IBLP curriculum has taught that in a sexual assault, if a woman or girl doesn't physically call out, she's considered just as guilty as her attacker.
That's unbelievable.
It gets worse. The curriculum teaches that an infant female's nakedness can create insatiable desires in men, including fathers or brothers, and so it blames mothers and female children for assaults, framing them as a punishment for disobedience or immodesty.
That is a complete perversion of justice. It's the polar opposite of the original law's intent.
It's in stark contrast to that procedural law we started with. The ancient law required the community to inquire diligently to protect the unjustly accused. The IBLP system, on the other hand, determines guilt based on the victim's adherence to these arbitrary modesty rules.
It just dissolves every objective protection.
Every single one. The burden of proof is shifted entirely onto the victim's behavior, not the objective facts of what happened.
Okay, let's try to pull all this together. We started with this very specific judicial rule in Deuteronomy 19, designed with severe consequences and strong procedures to protect the innocent. We traced that through the huge theological debates about whether deception can ever be righteous. And we end with the really stark reality of how those same principles, truth, authority, can be turned into weapons in controlling social structures, but only when that demand for diligent inquiry is gone.
The essential conflict is still there. It's that tension between the simple moral command to tell the truth and the very complex procedures you need to ensure justice for an individual. The whole point of that law in Deuteronomy was not just punishment, it was purification, it was public, to make sure the rest shall hear and fear, to guarantee the health of the community by protecting the individual.
So what does this all mean for you listening today? That ancient law required judges to inquire diligently before they acted on what they were told. In our world of rapid-fire information, especially on social media, where we all kind of act as judge and jury on people all the time, how do you apply that safeguard of diligent inquiry in your own life? What does it even mean for us to stop the spread of false witness when the testimony is digital, it's instant, and it's often anonymous? That is something we're thinking about.